Few images are as synonymous with the twisted world of Silent Hill as its grotesque monsters. Among these, the nurses and armless figures stands out for their eerie presence, but behind the unnerving presence lies a much deeper significance. It's all tied to the town's psychological horrors. The creatures of Silent Hill represents the disturbing mental state of those who find themselves trapped within the town and its nightmarish realm. I would be thankful if you subscribe, preferably to my channel. Not only do you make my day, but you also know when the next video arrives, so you can have another cozy moment very soon. The Silent Hill nurses are among the most recognizable enemies in the series. Their contorted bodies, the twitching movement and the grotesque, sexually charged appearances make them terrifying to confront. But while they might seem like simple monsters at first, they are, of course, much more than just gory figures designed to scare. They are a reflection of a deeper psychological trauma. In Silent Hill 2, the nurses represents James Sunderland's guilt and repressed desires. It's mostly related to his dying wife Mary. Now Mary spent her final years bedridden in a hospital, and James' guilt over her illness and his own emotional distance manifests in these twisted figures. The nurses wear revealing tattered uniforms, embodying a nightmarish version of James' repressed lust, combined with the pain and fear associated with the medical care and the inability to help his wife. Their faces are often covered or mutilated, dehumanizing them even further. The nurses' sexualized appearance is intentional. The revealing clothing and distorted figures symbolizes James' conflicting emotions of guilt and desire. As James grappled with his wife's terminal illness, he began to feel resentment and distance, which the nurses' overt sexuality embodies. They are the reflection of his conflicted mind, where guilt intertwines with a longing of a sickening display. Beyond James, the nurses have also appeared in other Silent Hill games, including Silent Hill Origins and Silent Hill Homecoming. In these instances, their appearance have evolved slightly, but they remain a symbolic medical trauma and the distortion of care and nurturing. Known by different names depending on the game, such as the lying figures in Silent Hill 2, the armless creatures with no hand or feet, or if you ask me, one of the most unsettling monsters you will encounter in Silent Hill. These twisted figures are wrapped tightly in a sort of straitjacket made of their own flesh. They also have no face, and their entire bodies convulse unnaturally as they slither or hobble towards you. What do these armless monsters represent? Well, for James Sunderland, these armless creatures are the manifestation of his emotional suppression and helplessness. The lying figures, wrapped tightly in flesh and unable to escape their prison-like bodies, are trapped in their own suffering, just like James feels trapped by the overwhelming guilt and grief over his wife's death. Their headless appearance, combined with an inability to use limbs, symbolizes the lack of agency James feels over his own life, over his own emotions and choices. They are also closely tied to illness and medical trauma, much like the nurses. Their tight flesh wrappings are reminiscent of straitjackets commonly associated with mental health institutions. The figures convulse and spew acid mist as if they are constantly in pain, or at least trying to communicate their agony, and this further drives home the idea that they are a reflection of mental and emotional suffering. Now, what makes them particularly terrifying is their complete form. They are figures in human shapes, yet they lack the fundamental features that make them truly human. This plays into a deep-seated fear of being stripped of agency, being confined to a shell without purpose or power, and trapped in one's own body. What connects both the nurses and the armless monsters is a common theme of losing control. The nurses, with their seductive movements, embodies a loss of autonomy, where care and trust becomes perverted into something grotesque. Meanwhile, the armless monsters reflect an even more primal fear, being utterly helpless, incapable of escape or action. Both figures are nightmarish because they take familiar human forms, healthcare providers and fellow humans, and twist them into these grotesque mockeries. These creatures do tap into fears that many of us harbor, fears of helplessness or loss of control, and the terror that comes with the betrayal of our own bodies or mind. So in the world of Silent Hill, these fears are brought to life as a physical manifestation that characters like James must confront head-on. Now, the town Silent Hill itself acts as a dark mirror, reflecting the most deeply buried fears and the regrets and traumas of visitors. The town draws on the psychological scars of those who enter and transforming them into the horrific creature we do encounter. In James Sunderland's case, this is probably sexual guilt and medical trauma that give lives to the nurses and the armless monsters, but other visitors to the town have faced different horrors. For some, the town manifests figures of authority, twisted versions of parents, teachers, and even police officers. For others, the monsters are more abstract, representing fear of failure or betrayal, maybe even loss. But no matter what form they take, the monsters in Silent Hill all share this common trait. They are very personal. They are not random creatures designed just for scares. They are intimately tied to the character's deepest, most private fears. For those unfamiliar with Silent Hill, the grotesque creatures might appear as random horrors designed to unnerve and scare, just like any traditional survivor horror fashion. But to truly understand the terror of Silent Hill, one must look beyond the surface. The nurses and the armless monsters are not just enemies to defeat, they are representations of trauma and suffering. They are symbols of what happens when human mind is pushed to its breaking point, and when guilt and fear and pain are all allowed to fester and grow unchecked. Also, the mannequins are the psychological manifestation of the twisted psyche. Like many of the monsters' entities within Silent Hill, the mannequins draw their power from the psychological depth of those who experience the horror of the town. Specifically, they are often linked to themes of sexuality. Objectification and repression, most likely representing unresolved and inner turmoil. In Silent Hill 2, where the mannequins are most notably encountered, they are also thought to embody James Sunderland's complex emotions and the frustration regarding his wife. The mannequins have a strictly sexual appearance, often resembling female legs joined together at the waist, devoid of a torso or a head. This incomplete, disjointed form can be seen as a reflection of James' distorted view of women and his conflicted relationship with Mary during her illness. The mannequins represents a dark, twisted interpretation of human figures that are devoid of identity or autonomy. Their humanoid shape, combined with their unsettling movements, make them stand out as grotesque reminders of humanity being reduced to mere objects. They are faceless, silent, and unsettlingly passive until provoked. at which point they lurch into violent actions. In the symbolic world of Silent Hill, the mannequins could be seen as representing faceless victims or objectified beings, robbed of personality, much like how James viewed his wife during her illness. Rather than seeing Mary as a whole person, James may have subconsciously reduced her to a burden or a source of guilt, which these mannequins now eerily symbolizes. Additionally, the mannequin's design, a pair of legs with no upper body, can be seen as a representation of James' repressed sexual desires. The town of Silent Hill pulls these abstract emotions into physical nightmarish forms, and the mannequins serves as a disturbing reflection of this. The mannequins within Silent Hill 2 are not aggressive, as I said, unless provoked, which add to the psychological horror they do instill. Their mere presence is enough to evoke dread into the players, as their inhuman form and uncanny movements are deeply unsettling. And when they do attack, their movements are jerky and unnatural, enhancing the sense of unease. And when you play Silent Hill and you find yourself in the dark corridors, they tend to stand motionless, often blending into the surroundings like actual mannequins in a department store. This false sense of security can lure players into a false calm, only for the mannequins to spring into violent actions whenever a player least expects it. Silent Hill, as a town, manifests monsters based on their fears and desires, and the guilt of those who visit, and the mannequins are of course no different. They are deeply tied to the game's overarching themes of guilt, or sin, and objectification. They represent incomplete beings, hollow shells of people devoid of identity or agency. The mannequins also serve as a reminder to players that nothing in Silent Hill is ever fully understood. The town's monsters defy conventional logic, and the mannequins are the embodiment of the surreal and psychological horror that permeates the game. The mannequins are also reflecting the town's ability to wrap the ordinary into the terrifying. Mannequins, typically harmless and associated with fashion or decoration, become twisted nightmares in the town, further driving home the point that in Silent Hill, nothing is as it seems. Even the most mundane objects can become horrific representations of the human's darkest corners. In this way, Silent Hill stands apart from other horror games. The town's horror are deeply personal and rooted in the psychological. As I say, they aren't just monsters lurking in the fog. They are the fog, the very essence of despair made flesh. In the end, the true horror of Silent Hill does not come from its monsters alone, but from what those monsters represent. The nurses, the armless figures, are frightening, not because they're grotesque forms, but because they show us something far more terrifying: the inner workings of a mind in torment. Silent Hill forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, the fears we try to suppress, and the guilt we try to forget. And in doing so, it reminds us that the scariest monsters aren't the ones lurking in the fog, but the ones buried deep within us. But these monsters are really scary. Let me know if you want more, and I see you guys again.